Okay. And there we go. All right, let's get my ugly mug out of there. And, oh, okay, well, welcome here. Glad to have you. We are starting our Lenten study here this evening. Plenty good room. A Lenten Bible study based on African American spirituals comes to us from Marilyn Thornton and Lewis Baldwin. Lewis Baldwin wrote this originally in, I think it was 2005, and then, but I don't think it was written for Lent. And so then Marilyn Thornton has taken his material and rewritten it for the season of Lent in particular. So, so here we go. And as we're getting started, just wanted to say a little bit about the spirituals to begin with. And if you read the introduction in the book, then you will have heard most of this. I'm going to summarize some of that for us, but and if you just got your book, then you can read it this week, so that's fine. But so the spirituals are a collection of songs that come from mostly from the period before the Civil War, a little bit after maybe, and coming out of the African American tradition, or creating the African American tradition in some sense. What Baldwin says about them is in their development, as they were being developed, there were a number of things that were going on. One was the musical traditions that the enslaved folks brought with them. And so there were the African musical traditions that included various rhythmic structures and chord structures and syncopations and things like that. Many of them, I suppose, were similar, but there were a number of different areas from Africa being represented. So those all came together and they were blending, as well as blending in with music that was happening here in the colonies at the time, or the United States eventually. And so all of those musical traditions kind of streaming together. He also talks about the engagement of faith for the enslaved, and that they were being exposed to Christianity and to a large extent appropriated that, or were acculturated into it, perhaps might be a better way to say it. And so I've got acculturation, abuse, and authentic experience. This is more my language than Baldwin's here. But he suggests that they were Christianity was the dominant religion of the of this country, and so that's what they were exposed to. And many of the enslaved people came to faith or accepted Christianity, but then their practice of it was complicated because of the situation in which they found themselves. There was one quote that I found in another article about these sorts of things, a story that a formerly enslaved man was telling about his experience. And he said that his master would often whip him, and especially if he found him praying. And that he was trying to whip the spirit out of him, with a capital S, spirit. So there seems to be some sense in which the white slave owners didn't want them practicing this religion, but at the same time, there are other stories that and other historical things that lead us to believe that that they felt it was their duty to make sure that the slaves were Christian. But they would only do that after they had been enslaved, because it wasn't right to enslave another Christian. So as long as they were pagan Africans, they could be enslaved. Then you make them Christians. Then you use the Bible to say, slaves, obey your masters, which is a little bit cynical. So there's some of that. Baldwin also says in the first lesson that for a lot of slave owners and a lot of people in the country, even those who weren't slave owners, slaves were seen as not having a soul. So really convoluted experience of the faith. What seems to have happened, though, was that for a lot of the folks who accepted Christianity, they had a really authentic experience of the power of the gospel, the freedom that comes from Christ, and the power that comes from the Holy Spirit. So much so that it shaped their experience and gave them strength and courage, as we'll mention here in just a little bit, to make it through everything that they were suffering. So they had a deep, authentic experience of the power of the presence of God through Christianity, even though it was abusive in many ways for many of them. Anyway, as all of these things sort of came together, there was a synthesis that happened of the musical traditions mixing with these life experiences, and they created these songs, many of which bring out stories from Scripture. A lot of them have direct scriptural references, and a lot of them are about being free and getting out from under the pain and suffering of this world. Not all of them, but that's a recurring theme, as you might expect. And some of them, a lot of them, by using the scriptural language, they're able to express their own emotional, spiritual lives in code, so that somebody hearing them would say, oh, they're singing Bible songs, but it's really the song of their own heart. And so they were creating this whole new kind of music that wasn't really entirely new, because it had all these historic roots from their traditions in Africa. And it gave them the ability then, they're simple songs, most of them, and they provided the opportunity to worship anywhere, anytime. You know, if they're working in the field or working in the house, they can be singing these songs. If they're resting, if at the end of the day, if they're all coming together for worship, they can use these songs. And that was a way for them then to find the kind of support that they needed spiritually to endure what was going on in slavery. So they find solace, they found escape, they found a connection to their own humanity that was being denied them in their setting. And they had experiences of the movement of the Spirit in powerful ways. So a lot of stuff going on in these songs, and I think part of that is that Christianity started out as a religion of the oppressed and the underclass, and so there, when Christianity was was forming, it was from a people oppressed by an empire who didn't want them doing all that sort of stuff. Right? And there's something in our faith that resonates with the poor, the oppressed, the enslaved, in ways that those of us who are not those things don't really understand. So, so they created this form of music, which continues to this day. Many of the songs were eventually written down, sometimes decades later. And then they were often concertized, written for choirs and other performing groups, eventually recorded. I came across some early recordings of the song that we're going to look at tonight from the 1920s, so about as early a recording as you could make. And eventually they crossed into white evangelical culture and became very popular across the board. So that if you go looking for a particular spiritual on YouTube, it's hard to find a black choir singing them. It's all these white choirs, which just didn't seem quite right to me somehow. But there it is. It's great music, and it carries that power of the presence and movement of the Spirit. So sure, why not? So that's just a little bit of background here on the spirituals that comes out of the book and out of a few other articles that I've. So let's start off with just a wee prayer here. Be thou my vision, dear Lord. May your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Amen. Okay, so here's tonight's, I'm going to pop you guys out of here. Here's tonight's spiritual. Every time I feel the Spirit, and we have done this, as Jeff was mentioning earlier, we've done this in choir a couple times ourselves. So here we go. You can follow along. I've got a recording of it. It's a modern recording that came with the first edition of the book from Lewis here. And so it's Tamara Lewis and Company performing the song.
On the mountain, my Lord spoke. Out of his mouth came fire and smoke. Look all around me, it looks so shine. Till I asked my Lord if all was mine. Every time I feel the Spirit moving in my heart, I will pray. Yes, every time I feel the Spirit moving in my heart, I will pray. Jordan River is chilly and cold. It chills the body, but not the soul. There ain't but one train upon this track. It runs to heaven and right back. Every time I feel the Spirit moving in my heart, I will pray. Yes, every time I feel the Spirit moving in my heart, I will pray.
Yeah. That is a browser, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah, one of the articles that I was reading about this, talking about when this crossed into the white churches, it said that this rarely failed to it would generate great enthusiasm in the church, and it was often used during the collection. So, for what it's worth.
It's meant to be acted out.
Yeah, interestingly, one of the early transcriptions of it has it as, this was about 120 beats a minute. And one of the first transcriptions, it was set at 50. So more than half as fast, and done prayerfully. So very different experience of that song. Y'all are familiar with this? That's the song you've heard before? Okay. All right, well, we're going to dig into it a little bit and see what's in here. So let's take a look at some of the imagery that we've got here. So upon the mountain, it starts with that. So what are some of the stories that you know from the Bible that happen on top of a mountain? Transformation, transfiguration. That's a good one. What else? 10 Commandments. Absolutely. Moses getting the commandments on the mountain.
I do that a couple times.
He did.
Does the Sermon on the Mount count?
Sure.
Even though it was a plane?
Sure, why not? Sermon on the Mount, of course, yeah. Yeah, any others? You remember, we were just talking about this not too long ago, just a couple of weeks ago. You remember the story about Elijah?
Yeah, that was on the mountain.
That was on the mountain.
Oh.
Yeah.
I was going to say that,
Oh, well, you should have.
but I was trying to get back to my mute button and I couldn't.
So, Molly, what were you thinking about?
Okay, how about Hagar?
Oh, Hagar.
Except
What
no,
about
that
Hagar?
actually wasn't really. Oh, Abraham and Isaac.
Abraham and Isaac, the near sacrifice of Isaac. Yeah, that happens on the mountain. Yeah, very good. Yeah, so a lot of stories there. So my Lord spoke. So that narrows it down a little bit. So we got the commandments there. We got Moses and the burning bush, maybe. We've got Elijah still. Lord speaks to Elijah. We got Sermon on the Mount still. We got the Transfiguration still, right? So narrowing it down a bit. Fire and smoke. Out of his mouth came fire and smoke. I don't know that there's any story that actually describes fire and smoke coming out of the mouth of the Lord. Can't think of one, but there are stories about fire and smoke. What are some stories about fire and smoke that you know? And or smoke?
Burning bush.
Yeah. Yeah.
Noah was in a cave when the winds and fires and everything.
Yeah,
came
yeah.
along and
That's Elijah. That's our boy Elijah on the mountain there. Yeah. The fire came by,
Prophets of
the
Baal.
earthquake came by, right? Yeah.
The prophets of Baal.
Oh, the prophets of Baal, yeah. So Elijah, again, on the other mountain, having the battle with 400 prophets of Baal and calling down fire from heaven. Fiery chariots is how Elijah was taken up into heaven. Yeah. Yeah. So Elijah doesn't actually die as most people do. He was taken up by fiery chariots with fiery horses, whatever that means. Yeah. Yeah. Right. How about pillar of fire and pillar of smoke? Pillar of
leading through the wilderness.
right? Yeah. Yeah.
Apparently in service.
Yeah. Okay. Looked all around me. So anybody looking around from the top of a mountain?
Oh, Susanna? No.
Not what I was thinking of.
Shall we come around the mountain? She comes.
Yeah.
What about the temptation?
The temptation, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Devil took him to a high mountain and said, hey, here's all the kingdoms of the world. Looks fine. Right? Yeah. A couple of you ought to know that because we just read that one in our prayer service. Yeah. How about when Moses goes to the top of Mount Pisgah just before he is,
Kiss the loop and not touch.
yes, yeah, before they cross into the promised land, Moses gets to look over it, but doesn't get to go in. Yeah. Moses also not dying in a traditional way. Nobody knows to this day where he was laid, but God took him up, and that's all we know. Yeah. Looked so shine. I always thought this was looked so fine, and I think when we sang it, maybe that's how it was written for our choir, but looked so shine. So any shiny things on top of mountains?
What about when Moses came back down and his face was shining?
Ah, yeah. Moses goes up on the mountain, comes back down. His face was shining like burnished bronze. People couldn't stand to look at him because of the glory. Had to wear a veil. Anybody else get shiny on top of a mountain? Jesus. Yeah. Jesus gets shiny on top of a mountain. Asked if all was mine. I don't know what to do with that. I guess that's sort of maybe that temptation. What's that? Yeah, yeah. Maybe it's connected with looking over the promised land. Maybe it's looking over all the kingdoms of the earth. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, so then Jordan River, chilly and cold. A lot of stories about the Jordan River.
Oh my gosh,
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. All that. And of course, they had to cross the Jordan River to get into the promised land. Right? Chills the body, but not the soul. I don't know that there are any particular stories about that. But what's that imagery suggest to you in connection with the Jordan River?
It's cold.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, I was actually thinking maybe that was in connection with their own experience of trying to get away by going across the river.
Say again.
That for the enslaved, maybe there were people that tried to escape going across the river.
Ah,
Kills the body.
yes, yes.
That's just the thought that occurred to me as I was standing here making pancakes.
Yeah, so the Jordan River, crossing the Jordan River, it shows up in a lot of these spirituals and a lot of gospel songs in general, but I'm just going over Jordan, I'm just going over home. Crossing into the promised land, it's an imagery that suggests going to heaven. So if you're going to heaven and you cross the river, it chills the body, your body dies, but not the soul, soul goes on. And so there's that. There's also crossing the Ohio River from the south into the north. Well, yeah, probably not. But, I mean, similar imagery, but not part of that tradition. River Styx, yeah.
But leaving the body.
Yeah, definitely. Right. So there's only one train runs on this track. That doesn't show up in the Bible. No trains in the Bible. Runs to heaven and runs right back. So
Would that be the Underground Railroad?
wouldn't it though? Maybe so. Maybe so. So crossing over the Jordan there on that train that runs up and runs back. Right? So it could be that. The other thing I thought of for runs to heaven and runs back would be Jacob's ladder, maybe, but probably much more about the Underground Railroad. Yeah. So all that in those, just in those couple of verses. A lot of different biblical imagery, and you can see then how it starts to connect with their own experience historically. Yeah, just that doesn't matter. Right. So what might all of these sorts of images mean if you were enslaved and considered soulless or in constant danger of punishment or death?
Could it be a message of how to get out of that?
Yeah. Yeah. What did you say, Bertha? Gave them hope. Yeah. Yeah. There's a way out of this. There's something better than this. Yeah. Right.
Like you said, an escape.
Yeah. Yeah.
Physically, but also mentally. So escape the brutality.
Yeah. Escaping the brutality. And then if we connect that then with that's all the imagery we were just looking at is from the verses. We didn't even really touch on the chorus, the refrain. Every time I feel the Spirit, I'll pray. So it's a hope that is anchored in that expression of being moved by the Spirit and being in prayer, which, as Mrs. Greeno taught me when I was in 3rd grade, is talking with God. So a communion with God, communion with the Spirit. Any other thoughts there? What that
Obviously, they weren't soulless if they are praying to God and the Spirit moves them.
Right? Yeah. So it's a declaration as well that I have a soul. I am, a spiritual being. I am connected with God. Yeah.
That they're human, they're
Yes.
people.
Yeah. Yeah. And, run it forward 100 years, you get to some of the protests in the 60s. You remember guys going around with signs that said, I am a man? Because nothing had changed, apparently. Well, that's not true, but I mean, not much had changed. There were some things that had not changed. So, yeah. So it's a declaration of personhood, of spiritual being, of connection with God, and of a destiny with God above and beyond the brutality that they were experiencing. Any other thoughts there? Yeah, God was their strength, and that remains. Indeed. Okay, so the lesson that goes along with it for this week, now that we've done all that, is in fact the Transfiguration. And you remember that we did this in worship just a couple weeks ago. It is actually a passage that we do right before Lent, because it's that turning point that happens in the story. And from here, everything is moving toward Jerusalem. Everything is heading toward the crucifixion. So, yeah. I don't know, somebody want to read?
Sure.
All right.
6 days later, Jesus took Peter and 2 brothers, James and John, and led them up a high mountain to be alone. As the men watched, Jesus' appearance was transformed, so that his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as light. Suddenly, Moses and Elijah appeared and began talking with Jesus. Peter exclaimed, "Lord, it's wonderful for us to be here. If you want, I'll make 3 shelters as memorials. One for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah."
Somebody else want to have a go?
Even as he spoke, a bright cloud overshadowed them. The voice from the cloud said, "My dearly loved son, who brings me great joy, listen to him." The disciples were terrified and fell face down in the ground. Then Jesus came over and touched them. That he said, "Don't be afraid." When they looked up, Moses and Elijah were gone, and they saw only Jesus. As they went back down the mountain, Jesus commanded them, "Don't tell anyone what you've seen until the Son of Man is raised from the dead."
Thank you. And one particular verse to, if you want a memory verse out of that, when they looked up, they saw only Jesus. Okay, so let's see what's going on in this passage up on the mountain where our Lord spoke, and cloud came out, and everything was shine. Okay, this is a story of theophany. Yeah. So theophany comes from theo, means God. Thein means to show. So God shows up, basically. It's a manifestation of the presence of God in ways that you can see and hear and maybe even touch. The appearance of God. So this is one of the big ones in the Gospels, but can you think of other stories where God shows up in the very tangible way?
When he made the covenant with Abraham.
Yeah, making the covenant with Abraham, definitely. Yeah. Some strange things going on in that story. Yeah. Any others? We've mentioned a few.
Well, from time to time, God does show off. I mean, sometimes just to his disciples there, this kind of thing. It's nice to the masses, and essentially, they told him not to say anything until after the race.
Yeah.
Well, probably for the fact that I don't know.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know either why you decided. Maybe. Yeah. Any other stories about God showing up? 10 Commandments, the cloud comes down on top of the mountain.
Well, the Ark of the Covenant constantly speak through it.
Yeah. There's a cloud that appears with the covenant.
Yeah.
Right? Until the destruction of the temple, when the Babylonians came, then that cloud never shows up again. Very interesting. Yeah.
About the baptism of Jesus.
How about the baptism of Jesus? Yeah. And what in particular do we find there?
This is my son in whom I'm well pleased.
Oh,
There's
yeah.
a voice, right? And Spirit comes down as a dove would come down. Right? We mentioned the pillar of fire and the pillar of cloud. There's a story where Moses is kind of hedging a little bit, and things haven't been going so well, and God promises to go along, and it's like, yeah, but how do I know? And God says, I'm going to show up, and I'm going to show you my glory, And so he says, stand here on the side of the mountain for a second. And God puts his hand over Moses's face until he walks by, and God walks past, and Moses gets to see his back. That's a fascinating story.
That must be cool.
Yeah. All right. So anyway, God shows up from time to time. And this is one of those times. So, yeah. So what did the disciples see? These three, what did they see?
I saw two guys that were major prophets that had been gone for a while.
Yes.
And there they were.
Yeah.
A little chat along. Kind of obviously the Messiah.
Right.
That's the guy right there. That's Earth shattering.
That's kind of weird.
Yeah.
All right. Seeing a couple of prophets. Great question. How did they know who they were? I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's a great question. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe Jesus said, "Hey, Moses, how you doing? Hey, Elijah, how are you?" I don't know. It doesn't say, so we don't know. But clearly, they were convinced that that's who it was. They knew. Yeah, yeah. Okay, so they saw a couple of prophets there. What else did they see? Okay, they saw light. What else? Shining face of Jesus. Yeah, his whole appearance changed. One other thing they might have seen. Well, but what was above the ground that they might have seen? Should we go back? There it
A
is.
cloud?
A cloud. Yes. There it is. A bright cloud overshadowed them. There we go. Yeah. So a couple of prophets, they saw Jesus change, they saw a cloud, they saw the ground. We'll get to that one. So we're not sure how it is that they knew that these ancestors were there, but that's who they were, but they did. What do you suppose that would be like to see some ancient prophets show up? What if, if I were standing up here and Peter and Paul and Mary Magdalene showed up? What would that be like?
We would sure have to look at you a little differently.
But they knew about the prophecy about the Messiah, so it was proving that he was the Messiah.
Okay. Yeah. So, right. And they get into this in the book is, they knew that they knew Jesus was a prophet. They knew he was a healer. They knew he was a miracle worker because they'd been watching him do all that stuff. They had a hint maybe that there was something else, with some of the big miracles like walking on water and stilling the storm. It's like, wow, nobody ever did that, right? But this.
I think you have to look at it in context. The major prophets like Elijah called down fire and all these things.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus' miracles, while amazing, would be in line with what a major prophet was doing.
Yes.
And so this was probably the aha moment where, especially when God speaks up and says, "This is my beloved." It's like, okay, this isn't another prophet, guys. Here, we're going to send a few of the other prophets along just to kind of give you a little bit of confidence.
Yeah.
Major affirmation, confirmation. This was the God.
Yeah. Yeah. So this transformation, this glorification, and the presence of the ancestors says, okay, something serious is going on here.
Yeah, much more so.
Right. And you were leading into this. What then did they hear? Voice of God. So what does God say? God says a couple of things.
My son.
This is my son, with whom I am well pleased, my dearly loved son. And listen to him. Yes. Yeah. They hear anything else? One more thing that they might have heard after all of that.
Don't tell anybody till after.
Oh, well, yeah, but there's one thing before that. Yeah, there's that too. Yeah, well, that's all right. They heard that. Yeah, that's one. There's one in between there. That memory verse. What was it? They looked up and they saw only Jesus, and he said,
Be not afraid.
yeah, get up, don't be afraid. What would it mean to hear that acclamation and command from God? Yeah. You talking to me? Yeah. Yeah.
I'm personally glad that God uses still small voice, you know, in your own voice, really. If I've ever actually heard the voice of God, I just felt.
Mm.
Well, a long time ago, they would say that was heavy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. Whoa, that was heavy.
He ain't
Yeah.
heavy, he's my brother.
Yeah. This is a big punctuation mark, and a big exclamation point on what they have known about Jesus. You know, something that they talk about in the book here is that in the African spiritual traditions, there's a sense of ancestors being present with the people still, even though they have gone on. They kind of play a dual role. They are off in the spirit realm, but they are also present, guiding and nudging and helping the people. You find the same sort of connection, I think, in the Celtic traditions, and often in the Native American traditions. In fact, a lot of traditions, except Northern European Enlightenment people, seem to have a sense of the ancestors being spiritually present, and of a connection of God and the spiritual realm being present alongside our physical realm. That's not usually the way we talk about it. You know, we tend to have this great separation, this dualism, that there's the physical world and there's the spiritual world. And there's earth and there's heaven up there somewhere, right? And I'm not, I don't know where I'm sure there are ways we could trace where that dualism comes from. But probably for the disciples, they would be closer to having a God-soaked world, where God was understood to be fairly present, or the spiritual realm was fairly present. They wouldn't be used to it being this present, probably. So this might have come as a shock to have the voice of God show up. You kind of have a sense, oh yeah, ancestors hang out with us, you know, but then to have them actually physically appear, and yeah, God's always with us, but to have God actually speak to you, that might be different. Right?
Well,
Bumping it
wasn't
up.
it true that only one person could go into the inner sanctuary once a year?
Yeah,
If they didn't do something right, they die?
yeah, yeah. The high priest was the only one who could go in the Holy of Holies.
So that would kind of, they probably thought they were going to die after that.
Yeah. So what did they do when all of this happened? Yeah. There we go. Some doing, yeah.
They were scared.
They were terrified, and they put their faces to the ground.
Although Peter, he said, hey, build a couple of stone carriages.
Well, sure, yeah. That was before the voice.
Oh, it's before the voice?
That's before the voice.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's just when it's, oh, there are some spiritual beings standing here with us.
Could be time to say,
Right? Yeah. One of the other gospel writers says he was so afraid he didn't know what he was saying, which I think is maybe a little bit of interpretation, but yeah. So yeah, that before the voice, he's like, yeah, let's do something. And then the voice says, yeah, they're terrified. And they hid themselves. Any other places where people hide themselves from God that you can think of? Adam and Eve.
The Garden of Eden.
Yeah, indeed. And lots of places where even if an angel shows up, people end up face down in fear.
angels are terrifying.
Yeah.
The way they're depicted, wings, and they're all females, like, oh, these things are.
Yeah.
They're made by God, and they're not exactly what you call creatures.
They are not mild creatures. That is for sure. So, yeah, have you ever been scared enough to hide? Or maybe at least hide your face?
When my wife yells at me.
What's that, Don?
When my wife yells at me.
When your wife, yeah. Yeah, right? Oh,
I'm with you on that one, Todd.
yeah. Yeah. Maybe, I mean,
When we used to work down in DC at night, I was afraid enough to cross the sky to the other side of the street if I saw a rather large gathering of hooligan types on the side of his head. I was hiding, but it was prudent avoidance.
averting. Yeah. I mean, I remember having that sort of fear maybe as a kid. The monsters or whatever, scary movies. Too many of our kids are experiencing opportunities to hide, I think, with school shootings and such. And probably most of our experiences, I hope I don't bring anything up for anybody. And I won't make anybody talk about it if you have, but our experiences where we're scared enough to hide, that's a traumatic experience, and usually for us involves violence or threatened violence.
Yeah.
So
With one exception, when you have to hide from the IRS people.
well, yeah. Actually, they're not too bad. I've had to deal with them a time or two, and they've always been. I've found them to be polite, actually. So and
You didn't get the accident, but that's another story.
yeah. So here they are hiding in the ground from God. What do you think they're expecting or thinking, or might not be thinking anything at that point, but what's causing that reaction?
I don't see it as they were hiding. I think, where were they hiding? In the air.
Yeah,
I think it's more complete submission to circumstance, saying, you know, we're here, we're on the ground, we're in complete, you know, you are God, we are not, and whatever thy will is gonna be, but please, you know, let us live through this.
yeah,
That's how I view it.
yeah.
As opposed to hiding.
Yeah, so when we talk about fear of the Lord, this might be one way that that we can think about that. Yeah. Their lives were not in their control at that point. Yeah. Yeah. Am I worthy? We're not worthy. We're not worthy. Right? Yeah. The presence of God is not something to trifle with, certainly. Okay, and then the coming down the mountain part, we have that exchange that we've mentioned already, where he says, don't tell them, and don't tell anybody else about what you've seen until Son of Man has been raised. And they're probably like, what? I don't even know what that means. But at this point, they don't know what anything that just happened means. So just add one more thing to the list, and okay, we won't talk about it. And they come down, and the next story that happens is they get down there, and a man has brought his epileptic child or demon-possessed, unclean spirit-possessed child to the rest of the disciples to get them to cast out that spirit, and they were not able to do it.
You said required fasting.
Yeah, prayer and fasting. It requires prayer and fasting. And then they start off back doing the thing, you know, going across the country and heading toward Jerusalem. So that's a heck of a way to make a transition back into your regular life. So, all right, so we've got the all this going on the mountain, and then coming back down and getting back into it. And the direction is this is supposed to be set apart now. You know, we're going to put a hedge around this and not talk about it for a little while. But what do you suppose, apart from this question that you have here, what do you suppose they were experiencing as they moved back into ordinary life with Jesus, and getting back into the company with the rest of the disciples? What are they thinking?
If it were me, I would be wondering what I had gotten myself into.
Yeah. That's raising a few questions, I would imagine. What else might you think? Yeah.
I would think they'd be more careful about how they dealt with people and how they dealt with Jesus and how they dealt with each other.
Yeah, maybe so. Yeah. I mean, certainly I would think their relationship with Jesus would have been altered a bit, or knocked up a notch. Yes, Lord would take on a little more meaning. So what then is the difference between transfiguration and transformation? It's kind of an esoteric question, maybe, but on the surface.
Probably, I'd say transfiguration is just a higher level of transformation. Transformation, you can clothes, different hairstyle, different speaking. Transfiguration, the whole glowing, that's like, you say it's a faith upgrade.
Okay, so just maybe a difference of level, of
That's what I was-
intensity, perhaps. Yeah.
I-
Um,
I agree with Jeff on that. I think that maybe transfiguration is a whole person experience, body and soul, whereas transformation is more kind of, I think that's sort of kind of more of an inside sort of thing, and you think about yourself differently, maybe because you changed your hairstyle, but it's more kind of in this context, it's more kind of an interior thing, maybe on the part of the disciples. But
Yeah.
the transfiguration was the entirety of Jesus changing, and the
Yeah.
light that he is being manifest in his entire person.
Yeah. So transfiguration is the thing that happens to Jesus. So it's this glorification. And transformation, I mean, we talk about that still. It's almost a jargon word in business systems and things like that now. Oh, we're transforming our business model, right? So it's a change of focus, a change of intensity, maybe of intention, the way we use it. I mean, there's a sense in which it also means a change in form, because that's what it says, change form, transformation. But the way we tend to use the word these days, as Molly said, it's kind of an internal change of direction. So, yeah, as you are responding to your surroundings and notice, the changes that are going on around you, maybe, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when you really receive the gospel, it changes the way you understand your own life. It changes the way you understand your relationships with others, changes the way you understand your place in the world, the purpose of the world. All of those things get changed. Maybe not all instantaneously. It might be kind of a process that you grow into, but there's definitely a shift that happens.
I think that's why I like a mission trip.
Yeah. A mission trip. Yeah. Mission trip can definitely be a transforming experience. So it's that thinking outside the box kind of thing that happens where you used to think all of this, and then all of a sudden, oh no, it's so much bigger. And that's kind of the experience that the disciples were having. And it seems to be maybe the kind of experience that the spiritual was talking about too. Having these shifts of an experience of the presence of God that makes everything shine in a way that it didn't before, and raising the question, is this for me? And what does that mean if you are enslaved, right? And I was thinking about that last night. I was thinking, what would God's answer be if you asked, is this all mine? And at first I thought God might say, no, what are you thinking? No, it's mine. What are you talking about? But I'm not sure that that's right. I'm not sure I was right about that. It might be, yes.
It's all for our benefit.
Yeah.
Be there.
Yeah.
It's still control.
Well, yeah. But it invites us to be partners in the world, right?
Mine means, hey, give us free rein. Expects us to be good stewards.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, in the end, the story, God dwells with the people in the city together as it's all ours. So maybe the answer to that question would be yes, yes, it is yours. And what a thing that would be if you were enslaved. Wow, that might be transformational. It might be for us transformation.
Nice.
Thanks. Spirit of the Lord is at work here, because I hadn't thought of that before I was standing right here. So how might Lent serve as a kind of mountaintop experience for us? How might Lent provide us with an opportunity to be at the mountaintop, to experience the presence, to hear what God has to say, to be transformed?
Well, it's kind of supposed to be a time when you meditate and think more about God and his works.
Yeah. So,
That's what I was gonna say too, Justin. It's like we're supposed to be more reflective and meditative in our prayer during this period of time. And God may in fact reveal different things to us as we do that.
yeah. So y'all got your Lenten disciplines in place?
That's what I'm like.
Yeah, well, let me invite you to consider that again. Never too late to add maybe a little attention to prayer, a little attention to the movement of the Spirit that might lead you to pray. You know, I hear that every time you feel the Spirit, that maybe you pray. So how do you know when you feel the Spirit?
God reminds us. That's what happened to me the other day. I was driving down the road, I'm working on doing something. All of a sudden, God, I call it tapping on the shoulder. It's not a physical tap. It's kind of like you'll come across a situation that will require you to think a little bit about the ramifications of something you might say or do with other people.
Yeah.
And God will kind of like say, hey, here's an opportunity, crisis work and an opportunity same time for you to grow and learn and do the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
That happens in minor ways as well as major ways.
Yeah. So maybe Lent is a time for us to be a little bit more, to use a word that's getting thrown around a lot these days, mindful. To be aware, to be conscious that perhaps all those indigenous spiritualities are closer to true than our enlightenment separation, and that we live in a Christ-soaked world. And that God is near and our ancestors are close. And that the Spirit is moving in our hearts to lead us to prayer. If we had a greater awareness of that, I think it would be a worthy Lent. Well, if you'd like to talk more about your particular disciplines for Lent, I would be delighted to spend some time to talk with you about that. But that's what we got here for this evening. So let's go ahead and close with prayer and be on our way. Gracious and loving God, thank you for this time together, and thank you for the movement of your Spirit. We thank you for all those souls who suffered so much and wrote such powerful music that has been passed down to us. Open our hearts and minds, like you did for the disciples, like you did for all those saints, that we might be aware of your presence, that we might feel your spirit. And when we do, that we'll pray and be in communion with you. Help us to grow in our faith, hope, and love, that we may witness to Jesus Christ in all we say and do. And we ask it all in the name of Christ our Lord, and let all God's children say, amen. All right, thank you, friends.
Thank you,
Yeah,
David.
thank you. Good to be with you all. And
Thanks, David.
you are very welcome.
You brought some new thoughts into this whole thing. Thank you.
Good. Glad to hear that. Hello. All right, so next time is lesson 2. If you've got the book, if you don't have the book, it's still lesson 2 next week.
Bye, everyone.
All right.
Bye, guys.
Grace and
Bye.
peace. Love you all.
Hi, guys.
Good job.
Thanks, Mom.
Yeah, he
See you
loves it.
soon.
Yeah, I'll be all right. It's just,